Did you hear the recording in progress?
I did, and I selected okay as opposed to leave meeting.
Well, that is a good instinct, and it'll
Thanks.
make for a longer interview. Oh, by the way, I read your Janie's garden story. It was really good. At
Oh,
any
thank
rate,
you.
I would like to get a couple of things cleared up before we begin the interview.
Ooh,
Your last name is Schmitt, Margit Ellen Schmitt.
well, okay. The first thing I should clear up is my name is Margit Elland Schmitt. I
Ah,
know there are two L's in Elland, but it's an Ellis Island thing, or as we might say at our house, the Ellis Island thing, that it's pronounced Elland and spelled Elland.
and Schmitt, how many T's does that have?
It has only two T's.
So it's two L's and two T's,
Yes,
and it's not Elland, it's what?
Elland.
Margit Elland Schmitt.
Yes.
Okay. And another thing I have here on my Margit, I'm just going to call you Margit.
Thanks.
On my Margit fact sheet is that you spent some time working in HR.
Did. It was my first office job. I just was looking through want ads, and it required a minimal amount of secretarial ability, except for typing, which I was very good at.
And I know you're a librarian.
Mhm.
Talk to me about your library education.
In the elementary school libraries, having a college degree and being able to read is considered enough.
In many cases, having a college degree implies that you're able to read.
Well, one of the little hoops I never had to jump through in order to be an elementary school librarian is I never had to read a story out loud to anyone. And that is not a skill every person who can read a book or a textbook possesses to an equal degree.
That leads me to a different question. I know you have gone to several, or at least one, writing workshop. Could you tell me a little bit more about your writing training?
Well, let's see. I've always enjoyed writing since I was an elementary school student myself. As a kid, I would fill up notebooks with my friends and we would write stories back and forth together. They are somewhere in my mother's attic, hiding away. She thought I would want to keep them for posterity. I don't know how good they are, but it was definitely something I always loved to do and always thought I did well when the assignments came up in school. So it turned out to be a pretty clear shot that when I went to college, English was going to be my focus.
And any subsequent workshop work?
Well, I went to, was run by the author Orson Scott Card, and I came to it because he had a fan fiction site on his website. So you could do these fan fiction writing. And one of the things that was on his site was he would have every year a week-long writing boot camp held at university or a college nearby. And so you would go and be a resident and just basically be able to put the rest of your life on hold for a week and do nothing but write a story and get critiques from other peers who also wanted to write and had signed up for this. There's only about 20 people at a time who come to this particular workshop. So it was pretty nice. There was a 2-day discussion about what to look at in making a story that was interspersed with sort of brainstorming sessions. Like he would say, go to this library, pick up 3 or 4 books and skim through until you find something that gives you a spark of an idea and write it on this index card. Now go to town and talk to as many local residents as you can find and write down something they say, ask them to tell you a story and then write down something they say that is inspiring you to write more about it. And so a bunch of little tasks like that happened. And then we would pick from those cards the story that we were going to write.
Did this happen before you did Faire or after?
This was after I did Faire, when I was a brand new mom. And I did it by abandoning my babies for a week. Luckily, they have a dad who took care of them.
What lessons did you learn at Faire that you applied at Writers Camp?
The first lesson I learned from Faire that I applied to Writers Camp is twofold. One is that most people who come to see the result of your artistic efforts want you to succeed. That there's often a lot of fear involved in putting yourself out artistically. You're fearing judgment, but the reality is most people are willing to give you the benefit of a doubt. They really want you to do well. They showed up to watch you succeed. And the second thing that I learned at Faire that I think applied to this writer's boot camp was that people like to be a little bit surprised. No, I take that back. I think the second thing I would say that actually applied to this writer's boot camp is that people love to talk, and that you can get a lot of really good, wonderful conversations from people just by asking open-ended podcast-ish sort of questions of random people. And, you know, it's like, what was the craziest thing that happened to you this week? And then you can write it down. That people want to share with other people.
I think the first point especially is true. People come out towards hot and dusty because they want to be entertained, and they're not going to be critical at all. And if you make the slightest effort to be entertaining, they will reward that effort, especially if they've been drinking. I have another question for you. I know you have directed things out at the fair. Have you ever directed anything outside of the fair?
Yes. When I was just out of high school, my first directing role was to work with two really good friends of mine to direct a musical for elementary school students. So I was the music director for that, in that I could play the piano and teach kids when the notes were supposed to go up and when they were supposed to go down in the pre-written music.
Very cool. What was the title of this?
The musical is actually a published work of art out there. It's called Don't Count Your Chickens Until They Cry Wolf. And it's a mishmash of Aesop's fables.
Have you ever won any awards or official kudos for any of your efforts?
I have, for different sorts of things. When I was in college, I won the National Choristers Award, which means I was a good choir member and followed directions well. Mm-hmm. I published 2 short stories as the result of this writer's boot camp that we talked about. And the first one of them was nominated with no effort of mine at all for Best Horror Story. The story is called Under Janie's Garden, and it was nominated for an anthology that comes out every year for the best horror and science fiction. And so I got an honorable mention, but did not get included in the anthology.
And it was not included in the royalty stream that ensued?
Yes, so my pennies did not rub together on that particular project. There was another story, and it did get published, and I got paid for both of the stories that got published in their original online magazine format.
Really? How much did you get paid?
I think it was I can't remember off the top of my head, not a ton. They were both short stories, and I was paid by the word, which is traditional for that kind of a thing.
I think I've got enough now to get us started. Today at Fair Folk at Work, I have a lady who's written, directed, and acted at the Renaissance Fair, and she's written, directed, and acted outside of the Renaissance Fair. I'm talking, of course, about my good friend, Margit Elland Schmitt. Welcome, Margit.
Hi, Dan. Nice to see you.
Nice to see and talk to you at the same time. So before we talk about your notable post-fair accomplishments, I'd like to talk about you before you went to fair. What was said to you to make you want to go to fair the first time?
Oh, let's see. It was the summer after I graduated high school. I went on a family vacation and came back to all of my best friends who said, "We got tickets to the Renaissance Fair. You have to come." And so I went. We dressed up and had so much fun on that first visit that we went back the next week.
Do you still hang out with those original fair goer friends?
I only hang out with them online. They have dispersed to other parts of the country.
How did you make the transition from fair customer to fair participant?
It was relatively painless. If you go to the Renaissance Fair and you spy someone who looks like they are doing an official Renaissance Fair thing, you can ask them, "How do I join?" And at least in the late 80s, which is when it happened for me, there will be a person who is all too ready to help you come and be a part of the fun things. In our case, the group that we joined first was a little local collection of participants that when they went to the big Renaissance Fair would join the parade guild. So we got to walk in all of the parades.
What words of wisdom were given to you as a sort of newbie that you still remember?
The more you put into your time at the fair, the more you will get out of your time at the fair. If you make the effort to be outgoing and friendly, you will find outgoing and friendly people come to you. If you make the effort to be thoroughly well researched in whatever historical aspect of the Renaissance appeals to you, you will find people who are equally interested in that historical research. It is a wonderful place to find your people, but you do have to have enough self-awareness or some good friends who can help guide you to your people.
Could you care to mention some of those friends by name?
It's not a secret. My friend Jennifer Stewart, my friend Diane Smith, my friend Noelle Avigdor, my friend Amanda Sano. These were the four ladies that I went with the first time. In particular, my friend Diane and I were walking along the street at fair and came upon a stage show that was performing. And actually the actors from the show were wandering around the street wearing giant boats on suspenders. And they invited us to watch their show and promised to name their plan of the show, I guess, was that they were going to sail to the New World. And if we watched the show, the promise was they would name the New World after us.
That sounds oddly familiar.
I wonder why. One of those people was you. And the other one was Mark Celine. And I remember we were so delighted by the conversation that we went home and went to our workshop and carved a little boat out of wood and made a little tiny map to go with the boat so that we could come back the next week and give it to you. And I remember you were very enchanted by the gift, but it was also very clear that neither of you remembered having that conversation. We were not intimidated by that at all because it was very clear you were having warm and wonderful conversations with everyone who passed by in an attempt to manhandle them onto the hay bales in front of the stage where they could watch your performance.
I wish I could say, but of course I remember you were the ones and blah, blah, blah. But you really are just in mass mode processing of people walking by, as especially as you're hawking for your show,
Hmm.
that you're just pleased that somebody's sitting down and then you're on to the next wanderer by.
It's an it was a very interesting experience because it was my first experience of outdoor theater. Outdoor theater at the Renaissance Fair is a special kind of thing. It's not even like if you went to go see Shakespeare in the park, right? Most theatrical events that you go to see are a little more formal, that you're ushered into a seat or you find a specific seat. Everything is kind of contained in the proscenium, but the audiences at the Renaissance Fair are so much smaller, right? Even the largest stage for a play really could only hold 100 people comfortably.
Yes.
And so you're with a small crowd. You have come through the heat and the dust to sit on this scratchy hay bale, and you're only a few feet from the performers. There's not a huge distance between the audience and the performers. It's very different.
Also, I would point out there are many competing elements for your audience's attention that is not the stage. There's parades, there's food, you're sitting on a scratchy hay bale, there's shade that's close that you could probably be more comfortable in. So you're continually competing to keep the audience's attention. And so when you write a fair show, you have to make sure there's something there every two or three beats almost. Also, the way you stage things, I think at fair, people are going to be walking by the road way far away, and you want to give them a visual that attracts them. They goes, oh, I wonder what's going on over there. And so you just don't have everybody in a line in the front of the stage saying their lines. You stagger things and have a lot of movement.
No, I think you are accurate. And I think there's a different level of energy to the performances in that kind of atmosphere. It's cool. I'm very glad I got to do it. I don't think I could have attained that artistic sensation elsewhere. So I was very happy when someone finally invited me to be up on the stage and not on the hay bale.
Which sort of brings me to not the next question, but what should have been the first question is, how would you describe yourself before you went to fair?
Well, I was a teenager. Before
Okay.
I went to, I had good friends and I was a very shy person.
Hmm.
Uh, I, I wanted to be an actor on the stage. And my first audition was for the musical Bye Bye Birdie. And it was a extremely forgiving casting process. Anyone who auditioned was going to be in the play, but they had to hear you sing and they had to hear you talk so that they could shuffle the kids around appropriately. And I was so shy to be in front of this audition audience that the very kind director had to pick up the tape recorder she was using, because this is in olden days, and hold it about 6 inches from my face so that she could hear the sound. During a performance, it should be noted, I'm really loud. So it's just this audition process that confounded me at the time. I was very, very shy
Hmm.
about putting myself forward artistically before I went to the Renaissance Fair, but being at the Renaissance Fair and performing on a stage where literally my success was not measured by money, because they don't give you a lot of money there, but it was measured by the number of people I could entice onto those hay bales. And so that is an actually lovely metaphor to, or motivator. It's a lovely motivator to get you out of your shell. It's like, I want to perform. It's only going to be good if an audience is there. And I'm the only one who can get that audience.
Are you the first performer in your family?
Yes.
What does your mom and dad do?
My parents are retired right now, but when my dad worked as a electrical engineer for
Mhm.
Lockheed, and he got to work on all sorts of super cool satellite technical stuff and was involved in quite a few awesome deals. My mom was a nurse, and then she went to college because she wanted to learn how to do graphic design. And while she was walking around the hall of her college, she saw a poster on the wall that says, "Don't you want to work for NASA?" with little pull tabs off the bottom. And she said, "Yes, I do." So she pulled that tab and went out to NASA and started working with the space shuttle astronauts. And
Very
they
cool.
like, when I talked to my parents about the choices that they made and their careers, for both of them, it's a lot of that same thing that happened to me at the fair, that it was just, I noticed an opportunity and I thought I better say yes.
What else? Basic fair bio. What shows have you done? What guilds have you been in?
Let's see. Well, I started with the St. Cuthbert's Guild, which was the guild that did parades at
Mhm.
the Northern Renaissance Fair. And I went from there to a group called Dogs in Doublets that was a performing stage troupe. And the first show I did with them was A Midsummer Night's Dream by Shakespeare. And then I did quite a lot of other Shakespeare shows with them. They did Hamlet and Othello, and a lot of Midsummer. Midsummer is a really lovely show to perform out of doors in the middle of summer. It goes well. I've also done As You Like It and Love Labor's Lost, and we wrote a couple of original shows. At the time that I was there, I was dating the head of the company,
Mhm.
and so he was really happy that I knew how to string a couple sentences together for the purposes of a play.
As in writing?
Yes, it turns out Shakespeare's plays are kind of long, and no matter how engaging you think you are, it's very difficult to get somebody to sit on a hay bale in the hot sun for more than half an hour at a time. So a lot of my work was to look at the Shakespeare play and decide what was the real essence of the story, to basically cut that thing down to the bone. If you watch a Shakespeare play anywhere else, it'll take you about 3 hours. But if you go to the Renaissance Fair, you will get the cliff notes and some unexpected jokes.
Just as a personal aside, I saw one of your Midsummer Night's Dreams, and it was brilliant. And part of the brilliance of it, and this gets back to your earlier discussion that art comes from having constraints, because your stage was basically two pieces of plywood end to end. And you had an actor who was 6'4" and 250, and you had another actor who was like 6'6" and really tall. And that's redundant, I realize that. And how you managed to direct everybody so there was a sense of movement when they were all on a platform about the size of my desk, and taking what's there and keeping the essence of it, but at the same time realizing that the audience was there for something else. It was really well done.
Thank you.
That's
I remember that stage, which also had an exciting challenge in that there was no backstage. You couldn't leave and be hidden. So, and there are, in Midsummer Night's Dream, 3 or 4 different sets of stories that happen at the same time in those woods. And, you know, if you were on a sane performing venue, you would actually be able to remove some of the characters so that there was a clear eye between where we are now and where we are then. And that was a very fun challenge to have to overcome. It's funny what an audience can be trained to notice or not notice. That if you are careful, you can actually have your performers, like we did, out in the middle of the stage in a big pile and still surprise the audience when they sit up and begin enacting again, because they're willing to focus their attention where you put it.
It really was good. And sometimes when you have constraints, trying to figure out ways to overcome them makes the project better.
I like to think that is one of the skills that translates really well in my current day job as a children's librarian, in that I work with kids who are 10 and younger, and frequently they need to have their focus directed to the place I want them to look. And so it's nice that I have some idea of how to hold their attention for the half an hour that I see them and give it some thought about how that's going to come across.
What is and this is now referring to Library Land, what is your favorite go-to story?
Oh man, it is a lot like being in a play. My favorite story is the story I'm reading that week. So I always choose a book that I really, really like. This year, I'm excited to have a whole lot of new award-winning books at my disposal. Every year, we're in California, and so every year we read the California Young Reader Medal stories. Those are always excellent. They're chosen based on what kids can't put down, and I still have a very childlike appreciation for the ridiculous. So I think my favorite story to read last year was probably Itty Bitty Kitty Corn, which was written by Shannon Hale and illustrated by Lian Sam. And it is probably the cutest book you'll ever see. It's about a kitty who wants to be a kitty corn.
Why?
Well, it's actually a really nice story about coming to your own identity, that maybe you don't see yourself as a kitty. Maybe you really want to make a sparkly unicorn horn and put that up. And are you surrounded by friends who support that idea? And it's actually a lovely, magical little book about how you perceive yourself, what happens to the kitty. I don't want to spoil too much of it because I think it's worth reading even for grown-ups, but what happens to the little bitty kitty corn when a real big shiny silver unicorn walks into the room is so sweet. And it's just such a loving, accepting story. And it resonated with kids of all ages at my school. That said, I think my other favorite story is one that I'm planning to read to people this year, and it's from our California Young Reader Medal contest, and it's called The Canyon, and it's by Dusty Bowling, and it's about dad and daughter who go rock climbing, get separated from each other when there's a flash flood. And it's a big test of endurance and family, and the family is already surviving an earlier tragedy. And it's all written in verse, which a lot of children's books are these days, even if they are novel length. And there's just so much beautiful stuff going on in there.
Speaking of endurance, do you incorporate any fair sort of acting tricks in your storytelling?
I do. One of the nice things about working at the fair, they had several weeks of classes for the participants to take, that there was an expectation that you would know at least some basic acting skills and some basic ways to keep yourself healthy and not dehydrated in the heat, to keep your audience's attention. And I still remember quite a few of the lessons. I think the one I pass along most frequently that I think a lot of people don't know is simply that if you can plant your feet instead of shifting your weight back and forth, you will immediately look and feel 150% more confident. And that's one I remind myself about every day, that you can take control of a situation just by being the only person who's standing still.
When I have done storytelling in a library environment, I also found it useful to share sort of warm-up exercises with the children. Like we play big face, little face, and we over-articulate our vowels. And we also play climbing a rope or a ladder. And I find that kids like that. They like the sort of directed exercise and doing something kind of silly like big face, little face.
I agree. I think there's a value to like a warm-up exercise like that. In my library classes, I have some starting of the class rituals. So there's like a library song that we sing every time that helps set the tone for where we are. The kids really like to have a routine, especially I think in these post-COVID days, that the kids that I see in my school now, some of them this is their first year coming back. And so that it has been for kids a very difficult time, because a lot of what kids like and value about school is the routine. And so for me to institute some routines about how you come to the library and how we begin, how they know the story is going to happen now, the sequence of events, very reassuring, especially to some kids who have felt like they haven't had any kind of security or routine for a while.
Right. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit and talk about how you think Fair influenced your writing.
I think actually Fair has done quite a bit. The main thing that Fair writing contributed to my non-Fair writing is a real desire to keep to the bones of the story, to figure out what really matters in my narrative and make sure, just like in reducing Shakespeare or Sophocles to a 30-minute blip, I want to make sure that everything that I'm including in my story, even though my story could be hundreds of pages, I want to make sure everything that's there matters and serves the point.
You're not afraid of editing out something you've already written.
No. I do think that one of the things when you are putting together a play at the Renaissance Fair, the expectation is you are not going to do one show. That the Renaissance Fair is open from 9 a.m. till 6 p.m, and that's plenty of time for you to do at least 2 or 3 runs through your performance. And it is really refreshing to have that opportunity to edit on the fly. That when you're in a stage show, you can say, oh my gosh, that didn't work out great. Let's try this instead. And so I think that is still part of how my brain works, that I'm like, that didn't work out. What else can we try? And so I know that even though that idea may not be in this story, if I really, really like it and it matters to me, it'll show up somewhere else.
Do you have any current projects or plans you would care to share with us?
Well, I just finished writing with you a novel called Lord Latimer's Ladies, that is a sort of time travel mystery.
I call it a romp.
A romp. A romp is, I think, so for people who don't know, you and I have written a couple books together, and I think that every single one of them could have the suffix of romp. We wrote a fairy tale romp,
which was entitled The Dragon, Lucinda, and George, which was a retelling of the story of St. George and the Dragon with a happy ending for the dragon.
And then we wrote a sequel romp,
which was entitled Maidens Rock, which also had an album with the name Maidens Rock associated with it, in which you sang quite nicely.
And this is the time travel romance romp because, at least for me, I like to make people laugh, especially if I'm working with them. And if I'm writing a book with you, I'm working with you. So I'll do something to try to make you laugh.
And vice versa, to use the technical term. Lord Latimer's Lady is in some ways, I think, one of our more ambitious projects we've ever tried because it has time travel, which is hard. And one of the things working with somebody on a creative project is a skill you learn at FAIR. Since it is intensely collaborative, I have found that is a skill that is easily translated to a non-FAIR environment, and that you have to genuinely appreciate what the other person is bringing.
I like the phrase you used, intensely collaborative. There's a big push for that in most workplaces now to improve collaboration. And I almost feel like I would like to take them back and do some of those FAIR warm-ups and exercises to say yes and when you're given an offer. When I go to a meeting, a lot of the list of the meeting norms that are posted up at the top, these are the things we have to remember. And they seem so common sense to me because of my FAIR experience now.
What are some examples of those?
One of the examples that I was thinking of is that it says to always assume positive intention, to start from a place where you're ready to accept that people meant it for the best, to listen before you respond. I think that is something that we did learn at the Renaissance Fair, because it's one of the attempts in that weird artistic collaboration was to create a whole town that your relationship with all of the people who were working at the Renaissance Fair was to attempt to portray that not only am I the actor in the Shakespeare play, but that the actor lives in this little village and knows the roast meat seller down the way and the pottery girl over here, and that we're all working really hard to maintain that illusion on top of the other illusion of a bunch of fairies turning somebody's head into a donkey's head. You know, there's a lot going on. After COVID, people keep saying, well, we've had to pivot and turn in new directions as we're trying to adjust. And I thought, you know, you have to be flexible to have that kind of thought. Am I talking to so-and-so in their character as the pottery wench, or am I talking to so-and-so because I need her to move her car out of the parking spot? Your brain has to switch.
You know, I had never thought of it quite like that. So I've kind of run out of things to say. So I'll be quiet, sit back, listen, as you tell us a story, the story of Under Janie's Garden, written by Margit, Elland, Schmitt.
This was Janie's garden. Peas and beans climbing over the back fence. Corn standing in a crooked row right next to lacy-topped carrots. Pumpkins sprawling in a tangle with the squashes in the corner bragging up their yellow gold blooms. Cucumbers pretending to be all innocent while they hid under the pumpkins' prickly leaves and thought about taking over the unsuspecting herbs in the patch next over. Marigolds, bright and gold, buddied up with the tomatoes. Janie's garden, and 10-year-old Janie sat in it, with her eyes squinched nearly shut, while the sun baked down on her old straw hat, and the ice cubes clinked and melted in the glass of lemonade at her side. She was waiting for Mom to finish her phone call. Janie's back itched, where the sweat was trickling down between her shoulder blades. It wasn't as if it'd be less hot for her scratching, but she did it anyway, in an absent-minded way. Her dusty fingers, dirt ground into black crescents under each nail, would leave a smudge across the back of her t-shirt. She didn't care. She was watching the back corner, the spot near the biggest pumpkin, and yeah, something moved. "Rabbit's back again," she said. Mom was busy. She was watering the roses up against the back porch. Those roses weren't properly part of the garden, but they were pretty, blooming big and soft and yellow up against the wood. Mom thought she was watering the roses, but she was really talking on the cell phone. So most of the water from the hose was running off in another direction. If the clients and distributors didn't get their acts together soon, there wasn't going to be anything left on that side of the house but one drowned and sorry-looking apple tree. "Mom," said Janey, and waved a hand to try to catch her eye. That didn't work. It used to work, before Mom's job went nuts and cut half the people working there, before Dad left, and before Mom had to do twice as much work as before, most of it on the phone. Not that she wasn't good at it. She was. She was a killer, Dad said. She was a whiz on the phone. "Mom," said Janey. "Mom, Mother, the rabbits come back." "What's that, honey?" said Mom. But at least she turned, so the water could chase off after the artichokes for a while. "I said—" "Oh, the rabbit," said Mom. "Don't let him get into the gourds again. You remember last year we—" But then the distributor or the client came back online. So it was just as well Janey did remember reaching for the big orange pumpkins last fall and pulling up one half-eaten shell after another. Mom had more important things to talk about. Rabbit. He was a problem they couldn't talk away. They didn't have a dog to chase him, and fat old Tombo was strictly a windowsill cat. Mom had talked about setting traps, but Janey had been creeped out by the idea of picking up dead rabbits, and so the traps had never got set and were still sitting in their boxes, gathering dust under the kitchen sink. It was Janey's garden anyway, so she got up, scratched at the sweat prickles in her hair underneath the floppy hat, and walked on over to the back corner, wishing there was such a thing as a scarecrow for rabbits. Only, up close, Rabbit looked too big to be scared by anything made of straw and old socks. He looked too big to be a real rabbit. In fact, when she got right up next to him, he thumped his big hind leg on the ground, then reared up and looked at her. He came almost up to Janey's shoulder, and that wasn't even counting the ears. She didn't remember him being this big last time she'd seen him, but that had been a year ago, and from the back door besides. How big did rabbits get, anyway? This particularly big rabbit didn't run away. He didn't seem timid. He didn't seem scared. He was brown-furred and brown-eyed, and his nose and whiskers twitched busily, and Janey really wished she hadn't walked quite so close after all. He wasn't doing anything much, this rabbit, not yet, but no matter how weird it felt to be staring eye to eye with a big rodent, Janey didn't run away, even though the rabbit had these teeth, bigger than they ought to be, and slightly crooked. But she didn't run. It felt like that would be overreacting somehow. She didn't want to look like an idiot being chased out of her own garden by a stupid rabbit. Sure, he was big, but he was just a rabbit. But then he started talking. "Janey," said Rabbit, "you're even prettier than I thought." Said Janey. Don't talk to strangers was the general rule, but she had to wonder, under the circumstances, if there was some kind of dividing line where the strangeness got so huge you had no choice but to talk. "Thanks, I guess." "Bigger, too," he went on, "but that's no problem. I like tall girls. Might be a problem fitting the wedding dress, but we can work something out. And the house. But you'll get used to ducking." And before she could even ask what that was supposed to mean, Rabbit thumped his big back leg. This close, she could feel the ground shake. Then he grabbed her. His paws were just paws, but when they got hold of Janey's wrist, she couldn't pull away, no matter how hard she tried. And she did try, because Rabbit was dragging her, hopping along the fence line. He moved fast, too fast for her to keep up by running, and it hurt every time she bounced down against the dirt and the rocks, and once even up against the stakes she used to tie up the tomatoes, but she still couldn't get away. She lost her hat. She lost a shoe. Those hairy paws were hard as rock, and the claws were sharp. And even if he held her tight enough to bruise, that was nothing compared to when Rabbit tried to dash down the hole he dug under the fence, one that looked too small for either of them to fit through, and Janey bashed her head against the side. That hurt. Even if she didn't exactly see stars, it made her wish she could. Stars would be a relief about now. They'd make everything look more like a friendly little cartoon, and a lot less like the middle of a monster movie. Killer rabbits from outer space. Except this rabbit didn't live in outer space. He lived under Janey's garden. When they reached the bottom of the burrow, Rabbit let go, and Janey finally had a chance to look around. It was not quite what she expected, but after a moment she realized that was because when she'd originally thought about a rabbit at all, she figured it must be of the hole-in-the-ground variety. And the minute she'd been kidnapped by a rabbit, she'd been thinking cartoons and storybooks. She'd expected to end up in some airy little bungalow with chintz curtains and a bubbling teapot. Someplace with a rug by the cheery fireplace, and cakes and jelly, and only a vague hint that there was anything like dirt or digging involved in the construction. This place, Rabbit's Burrow, looked as if he'd read exactly the same stories as Janey, only he hadn't got the point. The hole was big enough for Rabbit and herself, though she had to hunch down a little to keep from snagging her hair on the tree roots that made up most of the ceiling. There wasn't a teapot, and there wasn't a rug. There was a table, sure enough, in the middle, a three-legged sawhorse with a tatty red beach towel thrown across it to suggest a tablecloth. Instead of cheerful little pictures of Rabbit's bunny family on the walls, he had stuck up a row of human skulls, 4 of them, one after the other. There were some hunks of pumpkin rind and guts muddying up the ground near the sawhorse, and Janey guessed they were supposed to stand in for the cakes. There was a wedding dress, too, just as Rabbit had said. It was white, really white, as if it had been made out of the petals of sweet pea blossoms from her garden. As if it wasn't hanging from a rabbit skull in the bottom of a rabbit hole. And it was lacy. It even had a veil. There was a bed, too. "Our marriage bed," said Rabbit proudly. He'd got that right, too. It had a frame, a mattress, blankets, and a pillow. Even a dust ruffle. It was cute. It was clean. Janey was absolutely sure she never, ever wanted to lie down on that bed. She could see all this perfectly well, because there actually was a window, a hole about as big around as her head, high up on the wall, almost level with the ceiling. When Janey looked out, she saw a neat patch of mowed lawn, an apple tree, and a faded lawn chair. All that and a fat tomcat dozing on the windowsill. She realized all at once they were underneath her own front yard. "You're crying," said Rabbit. He seemed surprised. No, she realized he seemed delighted. She was sure there was a sort of sniggering upturn to that weird bunny mouth. All brides cry on their wedding day. It was such a ridiculous thing to say. It made her mad. "I'm not crying," Janey said. It didn't count as crying if you weren't actually snuffling, if you didn't blow your nose, if you didn't admit it, it wasn't happening. Anybody would get a tear in their eye if they got dragged across the yard and had their head nearly bashed in by a giant rabbit who was really kind of a jerk. "And I'm not getting married. I want to go home." "You live here now," Rabbit said. "You're going to be my wife." "I'm 10. That's a respectable age. I'm only 6 myself. I mean that 10-year-olds don't get married, Janey said. Right, she thought. Logic is always the best way to get out of marriage to rabbits. I can't believe I'm actually saying this out loud. They just don't. They will today, Rabbit said. See, I've been thinking. You've got that lovely garden. It's full of all sorts of nice things. A fellow my size likes regular meals, and soon as we're married, everything in that garden will belong to me, too. And he bounced around the room on his big hind legs. The room turned out not to be big enough for both of them after all. She realized when she got shoved hard into the wall once, and then again. She had to dodge fast to keep her feet out from under his heavy paws. I'm just going to hop over to fetch the minister and the wedding guests. You can start cooking up the feast. I can do what? Janey looked over at the sawhorse and the dripping yuck near it. That's a pumpkin. A squishy, drippy pile of pumpkin bits, really. Although, to a rabbit, maybe that was a feast. You grew it, said Rabbit. He paused in his heedless bounding to stop, and his foot stamped the floor. Hard. Don't you know what to do with it next? Well, I do, she said, and the idea came to her without even having to think about it. I can make pumpkin pie, but not without a spoon to mix the dough with. I'll bring you a spoon, Rabbit said, but no tricks now. If I catch you trying to escape from me, I'll bite off your thumb. Janey saw the way his huge, yellowish teeth glimmered under his whiskers, and felt scared enough to be sick. I'll bring a spoon for your dough, but you'll have to wait here while I fetch it. Janey, my bride, you can't go outside. And he stamped his foot until a fine layer of dust sifted down and covered everything, even the wedding dress, with a layer of brown gloom. All right, said Janey, picking a bug his stomp had shaken from the ceiling out of her hair. But she was only pretending to be cool and brave by this time. Whatever. Rabbit wasted no time bounding out of the room, scrabbling up the hole to the top again. Janey made herself count to 20 before she tried to follow him. Long enough, she hoped, that by the time she climbed to the top of the hole herself, he'd have bounced out of sight and wouldn't catch her again. But not so long that he'd already be on the way back with an armload of whatever. Except that when she tried to climb out of the hole, her hands couldn't find any place to grip. She could see roots and rocks well enough, and they should have been fine, but every time she reached for one, her fingers slipped right off again, as if what looked solid and stable was really slick and covered with some kind of oil. Same thing when she tried to use her feet. The rabbit run looked like it would be easy enough to climb until she actually tried to climb it. Then it was impossible. She tried the window next. Sure, it was high up and looked only as big as her head, but there was no way Janey wanted to be down in this hole when the rabbit came back. It wasn't like there was any glass to break. All she had to do was enlarge the hole. But when she tried, she had the same trouble as before. She couldn't get a grip on anything more substantial than sand, and no matter how much of that she knocked down on herself, there always seemed to be plenty more. So she tried waving. She didn't remember seeing Rabbit's hole in the yard before, but if she could see her house now, it seemed reasonable to think Mom could see her, too. Janey waved. She yelled. She stuck her arm out the window and flapped it around until it ached, but Mom was still on the cell phone, still drowning the artichokes. She didn't see. Even Tombo slipped down off his windowsill after just one slow glance. Then Rabbit came back. Janey heard him coming down the run and hurried away from the window. When he bounded in so hard and fast he knocked over the sawhorse and its towel tablecloth, she was standing there, trying to look at the bits of old pumpkin rind as if she couldn't wait to put them in a pie shell. He'd missed her by inches, but he carried a trowel, which he dumped onto the floor just underneath the window. "There you are," he said, with that cheerful, unpleasant smile, "straight from your own garden. Now you'd better start cooking. The wedding guests are already starting to arrive, and they're hungry. I invited the squirrels. They pelted my last bride with nuts. And the crows will peck at you. The shrew from down the lane, she'll bite if you hold still too long, and Badger will perform the ceremony. Don't ask him too many questions. Badger the minister. Get it?" And he laughed. "Yeah, except I still don't want to get married," Janey said, "so there's not going to be a ceremony." "Don't be stubborn," said Rabbit. "Just stir up your dough and bake your pie." "But I can't," she protested, and suddenly he was much closer than he had been. So close she could feel his breath on her arm, and the way the muscles all shook and jumped nervously under his skin. She felt nervous herself. "What do you mean you can't?" he asked. "Didn't I say no tricks? You asked for a spoon. I brought you a spoon. If you can't make our wedding feast, why did you say you could?" And he wiggled his whiskers at her and nibbled the air with his oversized teeth. Oh, I can. I can stir up the dough with this great, really great spoon," Janey said. She said it fast and was relieved when that too big head backed away a little. "But I can't bake a pie without a dish to put it in. Can you get me some kind of dish?" The head retreated still further, and Rabbit nodded. It turned out to be a pretty creepy gesture on something that wasn't built for it. "All right," he said. "Nobody can say I'm not fair. And you are going to be my wife. I should be nice to you now and then. I'll get your dish, but no tricks now. If I catch you trying to escape from me, I'll bite your hand off." Those big teeth swooped near again, and never mind how hot it was out in the sun. Down in the hole, Janey shivered. "I won't," she said, and the whiskers stopped tickling her wrist. "That's what I like to hear," said Rabbit. "You get your dough ready, and I'll be back shortly with the dish. Then we'll join the others and hold the ceremony. I'm thinking traditional vows, but you'll have to wait here. Janey, my bride, you can't go outside." And with a stomp of his hind leg, loud as thunder, he left again. Janey only counted to 10 this time, before she grabbed the trowel and tried to use it to help her climb up and out of the hole. It didn't work. Just as her hands had done, the rusty little would-be spoon sank into the softness and came right out again. She might as well have been trying to climb a mountain made of flour. When Rabbit came back, he came in a rushing bound, and a hail of gravel kicked loose from the scree at the mouth of the rabbit hole. His big feet seemed even bigger, and they hit the ground even louder. "I brought your dish," he said, and he had. It was one of the saucers Janey stuck under the potted plants out back of the garden to catch the overflowing water, and it wasn't very clean. Not that Janey cared, since her pumpkin pie dough was nothing more than the old pumpkin guts she had found on Rabbit's floor, mixed with mud. She didn't plan to stick around long enough to have to eat it. "Finish your pie," said Rabbit. He leapt onto the sawhorse, and it fell over. He leapt onto the bed, and it creaked. "Finish it. The guests are waiting. The owls are wanting to eat the mice, but that's bad luck before the ceremony. Besides, I think the mice are planning to climb into your ears. I've almost got their promise. They'll climb in, and if you forget to say 'I do' when Badger asks, they can each bite off one of your ears to help you remember. Is the pie done?" "There's one thing," she started, but Rabbit knocked her down while she was still scraping the pumpkin mud into the saucer, knocked her down and held her down with both paws pressed hard to hold her there. "No more things," he said. He didn't shout it. He said it very softly, and Janey couldn't breathe for fear. "I've given you enough things. I've waited enough. I'm ready to get married." Janey wasn't ready, not by a long shot. She imagined she could hear Mom calling. She pretended, and she thought of something that might help. "Just one more," she said. "I should have thought of it before, but I can't bake a pie if I don't have an oven." "I'm not bringing you an oven," said Rabbit. "Well, a fire of some kind," Janey said. "Or even wood. I could bake a pie if I had enough wood. I could light my own fire. I could do it then." Rabbit watched her. His dark eyes were glassy bright and wary. She wondered what he was looking for, what he saw. "No tricks," he finally said. "If I catch you trying to escape from me, I'll bite your whole arm off." "I won't," said Janey. "I mean it," he said. "I could just start gnawing. It's not a very big arm. I could have it off in no time at all." "I know you could," she said. "I could. I know." "Well!" And with a sudden burst of cheer, Rabbit was up and Janey could breathe again, could get back onto her feet. He shook the skulls out of the wall with his bouncing. He knocked the bed on its side. "Well," he said again, "I'd better get going. Can't keep the guests waiting forever. They all know how nervous brides get, don't they? They all know. They've all had their own marital woes now and again. I'll just get your wood and watch you bake the pie. I've never seen a pie bake before. This should be fun. How I wish you could come with me. I'd bounce your pretty head against a rock. Such fun. But Janey, my bride, you can't go outside." He left then, and Janey didn't wait at all. She attacked the walls with the trowel. She dug at the rabbit's run with the dish. Neither worked. The walls were too solid for her trowel to do more than scrape, and the run was too soft for the dust to even stay in the dish. "That's the dumbest-looking game I ever saw," said a voice from behind her. Janey whirled around in a panic and only stopped herself from throwing the trowel at his head when she recognized the shape in Rabbit's window. Tombo! It was Tombo again. It was Tombo indeed, her own cat, and she was relieved to see he looked exactly the same size and shape he always had been. He had simply relocated himself from one windowsill to another. Now he twitched his tail at her. "Trust me, I'm a cat. We think chasing wadded-up balls of paper is high art. What you're doing with that shovel thingy, that's stupid." "I'm trying to get outside," Janey said. Given freaky Mr. Rabbit, she was willing to accept that Tombo had decided to start talking today. "You can't do that," the cat said. "I know, I keep slipping," she said. "I thought the shovel would, give me more traction." It had seemed a sensible idea at the time. It really had. Explaining things to a cat with that expression on its face was bound to make anybody feel like a complete idiot. "Yes, but what I mean, Janey, is that you can't do it because you're under a spell. You're not able to leave this charming little dwelling. You can't set hand or foot outside. That rabbit who caught you is a pretty good wizard, for his kind." "A wizard," said Janey. "Yes." "A rabbit wizard." "Yes." "I want to go home." "So noted," said Tombo. "I can help you, if you want." She wasn't in the mood for riddles, and Rabbit was going to be back any minute. If she wanted, talk about stupid. She was more than ready, if only the trowel could have made a dent in the walls or the floor. Now Tombo said he could help her? How? She asked. Can you break the spell he's cast on me? No, the cat said. He's got your comings and goings tied up in knots only a rabbit can undo. But it happens I'm also a pretty good wizard for one of my kind. From the sound of it, the standards he held himself up to were a bit higher than anything he expected a mere bunny to achieve. When your husband-to-be comes back, don't call him that, said Janey. Well, what is one to think? He's already sent out the invitations. Tombo winked, much too self-satisfied for comfort. Janey tried to glare a burning hole right through that smirk, and was glad when her cat stopped with the jokes. When Rabbit comes back, you make your fire. What happens then? I haven't got any matches, she said. My dear, I believe I've already mentioned I'm a wizard. I'll light the fire for you. Trust me, Rabbit will panic. Just don't let him put it out. The more it burns, the more frightened he'll become. You can make him break the spell when that happens. Okay, she said doubtfully, but wouldn't it just be easier if you went around the house and got Mom? I mean, you can talk now. You can tell her what's wrong. Tombo yawned, and Janey took it as a negative. She never listens to me either, he said, and that was that, until Rabbit came back. He came more slowly this time, but that was because he was bigger than ever, almost too big to fit down his own hole, and giggling with pride. Look at this, he said as he lay armloads of kindling at her feet. Look what I can carry. Look how strong I am. Here is your wood, here and here. It all clattered down at her feet, and Janey hurried to pick it up again and stack it up in a way that looked the most flammable before Rabbit got angry and knocked her down again. She hadn't ever built a fire before, but then she didn't really have to get this one going either. She picked up the saucer of muddy pumpkin yuck and stole a glance at Tombo in the window. For Rabbit Dyer, he said, smoke and fire. The wood blazed up so quickly Janey had to jump backwards to keep from being singed. She bumped right into Rabbit, but he was lunging after the cat in the window and didn't seem to notice. The fire frightened him. Tombo had been right. Rabbit was in a panic, trying to run away, trying, in Rabbit fashion, to get underground for safety, but there was nowhere to go. They were already both under the ground already. He circled the room, his big, heavy paws shaking the earth with each leap, and circled it again. Janey ran too, to try and stay out of the way, but couldn't. Rabbit was too big and too clumsy. He knocked her down, and when she got up again and tried to move, she couldn't see for smoke, and barked her shin against the broken sawhorse. She finally made herself stay down at the base of the run. She reached out and caught the red towel from under the sawhorse and covered her mouth and nose with it. The towel helped, but smoke was everywhere. It rushed toward the window. It rushed toward the rising slope of the run as if they were both chimneys, and Rabbit didn't dare try to use either as an exit. There was so much smoke. It made the fire seem even more terrible, more bright and awful than it could possibly have been. Janey didn't believe the fire was big enough to kill them, but Rabbit did. Make it stop, he said. Make it go away. I can't stop it, she said. I'm baking the pie you wanted. I don't want the pie anymore, he said. I want to get out of here. That fire, it will burn me up. I can't help you, Janey told him. He knocked her down, harder than before, and shook her, rocking her back and forth between his hard, heavy paws. You have to, he said. You're my wife. You have to help me escape. I can't, she said. You've made it so I can't. It's your spell. Take it off. Rabbit stared. His eyes were wide and round, the whites showing clearly as he looked this way and that. "The fire," he said. "It's going to burn me up." He had a point. The fire was spreading. It was already well on the way to devouring the wood he'd brought, and had jumped to where the bed was lying on its side and had started in on the blankets there. At this rate, the wedding dress and the stupid lacy veil would be next. Janey liked the idea, but she really hoped she wasn't there to see it. "Let me go," she said. "Take off the spell." "All right," said Rabbit, "all right." He stamped his foot, hard enough that she felt it break through the hard-packed ground, so it cracked and split apart beneath her. "Janey, my bride, you're free. Go outside." So she ran. That's all. A mad, scrambling dash. She could feel whiskers and hot breath on the foot that was bare, kicked back hard, and lost her other shoe. Rabbit. Rabbit was coming, but so was Mom. Janey ran up the smoky tunnel and out into the open air. The ground was firm under her hands and feet. She did more crawling than running, but she got out.